slavery was not the reason a civil war was fought at all. The Civil War was fought to bring the South back into unison with the North and to destroy the economic advantage that the South had had due to slavery. It was not about protecting us because they had somehow waken up and realized that we were human beings too. No, the South was growing too powerful.
Capitalism started to rise. But what began to happen is that in capitalism rising, it began to stifle capitalism because capitalism demands as an economic system that people are always trying to rise to the higher. They're competing. Competition fuels capitalism. But if you could buy an African for $300 and then pay somebody for 20 years $300 a year, which would you do? You'd buy someone one time for $300. But that's going to stifle capitalism because what's going to happen is there's going to be no competition because what European is going to compete for a job that they could buy an African to do? So the North said, look, enslavement of African people is stifling capitalism. And so the South said, so what you want me to do? They said, well, you got to free your Africans. I said, free my Africans? Well, how am I going to get my money? North said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. They said, we don't trust you. No, we're not going to sell we are not going to stop enslaving Africans. We're just not going to do it. North said, but you have to because it's going to stifle capitalism and we're going to choke with overproduction without an ability to sell what we're South said, but that's not my problem because I can sell my raw materials any place in the world. The North said, but then what would happen to us? We have factories. The South said, well, that sounds like a personal problem to me. I don't care what happens to you. North said, but you can't do that. South said, we're going to do that. We're not freeing Africans. They said, you got to free Africa. We're not freeing. In fact, the South said to the North, I'm tired of talking to you. I'm going to secede. I'm not even going to talk to you no more. In fact, I'm not even part of what your colonies are anymore. North said, you can't do that. South said, watch. That started the Civil War.
Well, one of the big things that occurred right at the end of the Civil War was that Europeans began to form unions. In fact, the workers' union is an outgrowth of slavery and the Civil War. When it looked like the cause was lost for the Confederacy, white men began to organize themselves into labor forces. Why did they do this? Because you are about to see 2 million enslaved Africans set free who have skills that equal or supersede your own, who would now be able to compete and vie with you for contracts and livelihood. That was a European who was looking for work, couldn't find any because it had already been hired up to the slaves of a certain master. So when the Civil War came about and when slavery was about to end, that intensified. In fact, some of the first unions were started right here in Pennsylvania. And a lot of black people failed to realize the origin of the union. The union is nothing but a collective force of white people who are protecting jobs for themselves and keeping them away from black people.
The fight came that after slavery ended, we had jobs, which is what you mentioned earlier, that we were starting to get it together because we had skills. Part of that destruction during all that Jim Crow and everything was fighting against the brothers who were trying to be in business and who were trying to work for building. We were the contractors, our people.
Abraham Lincoln himself said, if I could keep Africans enslaved and preserve the Union, I would do that. Abraham Lincoln didn't want to free African people. He had to because of capitalism, because he saw what was happening. But look at the mean trick. Let's continue the story. Now you have Africans that are free, who are part and parcel of America, who deserve not just a break, but they need a little bit more because they built America and made America what it was. So between 1865 and 1877, we have what's called the Reconstruction period, where black folk were going out, going to school, graduating, becoming doctors, lawyers. They were speaking Greek, Latin, better than people who taught Greek and Latin. They were going in, becoming senators, they were becoming congresspeople, they were becoming part of the world arena. Europeans got scared. So what did they do? They started an organization that would attack black folk. It was called the Tea Party. No, not the Tea Party. It was called the Ku Klux Klan. I'm sorry. I'm jumping up in history here. They're going to start to pass laws where segregation is going to exist, because they don't want Africans to be able to take the jobs that are going to be fueled by capitalism. So what do? They said, bring me your weak, your poor, your homeless. Bring me your sick, your ignorant. And that's when the immigration came. And that's who got the jobs that was supposed to go to black folk.
A lot of people, post-slavery Africans were consolidated. They were more together than ever. Segregation gave them the necessity, or created the necessity for them to maintain a type of cohesion with each other, no matter if it was infighting. They still had their self-interest and the collective interest. So we didn't know who the enemy was back there. Today, after integration, we don't know who the enemy is anymore.
The following conversation had taken place in the Oval Office of the White House. It began on the 30th of March, 1972, and continued 4 days later on the 3rd of April. This is an actual recording of that conversation. The speakers are the President of the United States, Republican Richard Nixon, and members of his senior staff.
A majority of people in Colorado voted for abortion. I think a majority of people in Michigan are voting for abortion. I think in both cases, well, certainly in Michigan, they will vote for it because they think that what's going to be aborted generally are the little black bastards. As I told you, we talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the Negro bastard. Yeah. Isn't that very true? So we know what we're talking about, population control. Sure. We're talking really, and what John Rockefeller really realizes, the people in what we call our class control their populations. Sometimes they'll have a family of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, but it's exception. The people who don't control their families are people the people that shouldn't have kids. Now that's the black population. Black in the city of San Francisco has gone from 3,000 right after World War II to where they represent 30% of the population of San Francisco. That's it.
The Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights was originally created with the financial backing of John Rockefeller, and its current president is an African American who was once appointed to the Washington, D.C. City Council by Richard Nixon. In the early 1990s, the organization changed its name and is today known as the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice.
Eugenics goals are most likely attained under a name other than eugenics. Frederick Osborne, president and founding member of the American Eugenics Society.
By the late 1930s and early 1940s, revelations about Nazi and fascist atrocities in Europe were causing the public to become increasingly uncomfortable with terms like eugenics and population control. This alarmed the leaders of the American Birth Control League, who were aware that this shifting attitude could impact both their ability to implement their racial agenda and their ability to raise funds. They were also aware that the connections between the American Birth Control League and the Nazis were starting to become known. Marketing research had shown them that in this environment, they needed to move away from words like control in favor of less threatening words like planning. So in 1942, they changed the name of the organization. From then on, the American Birth Control League would officially be known as Planned Parenthood.
The important thing to understand here is that this name change did not change the organization's agenda. The same people were still in control, they were still obsessed with race, and they were still dedicated to eugenics. Today, defenders of Margaret Sanger will often try to hide her racism by claiming that she was not really a eugenicist and that Planned Parenthood was never part of the eugenics movement. But the truth is that as late as 1956, the American Eugenics Society listed Sanger as a member of the organization. In addition, many of Sanger's colleagues and the people whose writings she published, as well as many of Planned Parenthood's officers, were also known to be members.
In fact, the ties between Sanger and the eugenics movement were so well established that in the 1920s, Sanger pursued a plan to merge the American Birth Control League, or Planned Parenthood as it was later called, with the American Eugenics Society.
African-American physician named Dr. Charles Greenlee Greenlee had been a staunch supporter of Planned Parenthood, but became suspicious of the organization after noticing that black neighborhoods in his city were, as he described it, saturated with Planned Parenthood facilities, while nearby white neighborhoods that were just as poor did not have a single one.
In an article published by the black Muslim newspaper Mohammed Speaks, Greenlee said he had also discovered that deceptive materials were being circulated in the ghettos and delivered to the homes of black women, warning them that welfare recipients who had additional children would lose their public assistance. Greenlee knew that wasn't true and concluded that Planned Parenthood was pushing a hidden agenda. It was then he severed his ties to the organization and started working against it.
The idea is to make less niggas so they won't have to build houses for them. If we keep producing, they're either gonna have to kill us or grant us full citizenship. Dr. Charles Greenlee, civil rights activist, 1968.
It is strange that they chose to start talking about population control at the same time that black people in America and people of color around the world are demanding their rightful place as human citizens and their rightful share of the material wealth in the world. Jesse Jackson, 1977.
For all their failures, what the eugenics movement had accomplished was to lay the foundation for the next phase of their plan. And this is where they would find the success that they had been chasing for over 100 years.
What would you say is now the #1 cause of death in the African American community?
Heart disease.
Oh, HIV/AIDS.
Diabetes, cancer, AIDS.
I'll say heart disease.
AIDS.
From what I heard, it's probably AIDS, you know.
Probably heart disease.
I think heart disease.
HIV. Gang violence.
What if I told you the real answer was abortion?
Since 1973, legal abortion has killed more African Americans than AIDS, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and violent crime combined. Every week, more blacks die in American abortion clinics than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. And the largest chain of abortion clinics in the United States is operated by Planned Parenthood.
We have now reached a point in this country that African American women, though they make up 12% of the population, they account for 37% of the abortions. An African American baby is almost 5 times more likely to be aborted than a white child. The abortion industry at this point kills as many African American people every 4 days as the Klan killed in 150 years. And you can truly say the most dangerous place for an African American to be is in the womb of their African American mother.
All across America, you can stand outside of the abortion clinics and see a steady stream of black women coming in and out. But somewhere along the way, we got the idea that this is a white issue or a conservative issue or a Republican issue, and therefore, it's not an issue that we have to be concerned about. This same attitude has allowed Planned Parenthood and other members of the abortion industry to carry out this genocide right under our very noses. Right now, in America, about half of our babies are being killed in the womb. And in certain parts of America, more of our babies are being aborted than are being born.
When 17